guys, we are back with yet another friend as a little dog that gets to join us today. Today we are reading chapter 12, George's Secret Key to the Universe. It's getting pretty excited. George and Annie are out on a comet and they're starting to travel around to visit the other planets, so this should be really exciting. When George opened his eyes again, he saw a massive pale yellow planet with a belt of rings rising in the dark sky ahead of them. Can you imagine which planet this might be? They sped along on the comet, heading for a point just above the rings. From far away, the rings looked like soft ribbons. Some were pale yellow, like the planet itself. Others were darker. "This is Saturn," said Annie, "and I saw it first." Did you guess that it was Saturn? No, you weren't. "I know what it is," replied George. "And what do you mean first? I'm in front of you. I saw it first." "No, you weren't looking, and you were too scared. You had your eyes shut." Annie's voice rang inside his helmet. "Ner. "No, I didn't," protested George. "Shh," Annie interrupted him. "Did you know that Saturn is the second biggest of the planets that move around the sun?" "Of course I knew," lied George. "Oh, really?" replied Annie. "Then if you knew that, you'll know which is the biggest planet of all." "Well, said George, who had no idea. "It's the Earth, isn't it?" "Wrong," trumpeted Annie. "The Earth is teeny weeny, just like your silly little brain. The Earth is only number 5. "How do you know that?" "How do I know you've got a silly little brain?" said Annie sarcastically. "No, stupid," said George furiously. "How do you know about the planets?" "Because I've done this trip many, many times before," said Annie, tossing her head as though throwing back her ponytail. "So, let me tell you, and listen carefully," she ordered. "There are 8 planets orbiting the sun. 4 are huge and 4 are small. The huge ones are Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus. But the 2 biggest are so much bigger than the others that they are called the giants. Saturn is the second of the giant planets, and the biggest one of all is Jupiter. The 4 small planets are Mars, Earth, Venus, and Mercury." She continued, ticking them off on her fingers. "The Earth is the biggest of the small ones, but if you put these 4 together into a ball, you still wouldn't get anything nearly as big as Saturn. Saturn is more than 45 times bigger than these 4 small planets added together. So if you took all the little planets and made 45 of them, Saturn's still bigger." Annie was clearly delighted to be showing off about the planets. Even though he was very annoyed by how smug she was, George was secretly impressed. All he had ever done was dig potatoes and mess around with a pig in his backyard. It wasn't much in comparison with riding around the solar system on a comet. As Annie talked, the comet flew nearer and nearer to Saturn. They got so close that George could see that the rings were made not of ribbons, but of ice, rocks, and stones. These were all different sizes. The smallest, no bigger than a speck of dust. The largest, about 12 feet long. Most of them were moving much too fast for George to catch one, but then he spotted a small chunk of rock calmly floating right next to him. A quick glance behind showed that Annie wasn't looking. He reached out, snatched up the rock, and held it in his space glove. A real treasure from outer space. His heart was beating fast. The sound was so loud in his ears that he thought Annie must be able to hear it through the sound transmitter in his helmet. He suspected that taking things home from outer space was probably not allowed, so he hoped she hadn't noticed. "George, are you all right?" asked Annie. "Why are you wiggling around like that?" George quickly thought of something to say to divert her attention from the rock he was trying to stuff in his pocket. He's holding the rock in the picture. Alright, this next page talks about the solar system, so we're going to come back to that later. Why did we change direction? Why did our comet move towards Saturn? Why didn't we continue in a straight line? He babbled. Oh dear, you just don't know anything at all, do you? Sighed Annie. It's lucky for you that I'm such a fount of useful scientific knowledge, she added importantly. We moved toward Saturn because we fell toward it. Just like an apple falls on Earth, just like we fell onto the comet when we arrived, just like the particles in space clouds fall onto each other and become balls that become stars. Everything falls toward everything throughout the universe. Do you know the name of what causes this fall? Are you thinking of it? George didn't have a clue. It's called gravity. So it's because of gravity that we're going to fall on Saturn now and crash. Oh, this was George talking. I need to read it again. So it's because of gravity that we're going to fall on Saturn now and crash? No, silly. We're moving way too fast to crash. We're just flying by to say hello. Annie waved to Saturn and shouted, "Hello, Saturn," so loudly that George's hands automatically tried to cover his ears, but he couldn't because of his helmet. So instead he yelled back, "Don't shout!" "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to." As they whizzed past Saturn, George saw that Annie was right. The comet didn't fall all the way onto the giant planet, but cruised straight past it. With some distance now, he could see that Saturn not only had rings, but also had a moon like the Earth. They're waving at Saturn. Well, Annie's waving. George is trying to cover his ears. Looking closer, he could hardly believe his eyes. He saw another moon and yet another. In total, he saw 5 large moons and even more small ones before Saturn was too far away for him to keep counting. Saturn has at least 5 moons, he thought. George hadn't known that a planet other than the Earth could have even 1 moon, let alone 5. He looked at Saturn with respect as the giant planet with rings shrank into the distance behind them until it was just a bright dot in the starry background. That's the end of the chapter, but let's go back to the page right after 109, so I believe it would be page 110. It says the solar system. It looks like this. We'll read through it. The solar system is the cosmic family of our sun. It comprises or is made up of all the objects trapped by the sun's gravity. Planets, dwarf planets, moons, comets, asteroids, and other small objects yet to be discovered. An object trapped by the sun's gravity is said to be in orbit around the sun. The closest planet is Mercury. It's 36 million miles away from the sun on average, so it kind of moves in and out a little bit. So right there, you can see Mercury. And then the sun is over here. The farthest planet is Neptune, and it's 2.8 billion miles away from the sun. So there's Neptune, way out here. The distance from the Earth to the sun is 93 million miles. That's kind of a fun fact to know, if you can remember that. People can go there 93 million miles from the sun. So here is Earth, right there. You see it's very different from where Neptune is. There's 8 planets. From closest to the sun, the planets are Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. So they all go in that order. There's 3 dwarf planets. From the closest to the farthest, the dwarf planets are Ceres, Pluto, and Eris. So Eris is even farther out than Pluto. The number of known planetary moons, so moons that go around planets, and this is the number that they know about. They keep discovering new moons. So when this book was written, it actually still might be inaccurate. So you should look it up and see if they've found more moons since this book was written. But when the book was written, they knew about 165 moons. Mercury didn't have any, Venus doesn't have any, Earth has 1, Mars has 2, Jupiter has 63, Saturn has 59, Uranus has 27, and Neptune has 13. Can you imagine having all those moons going around your planet? The number of known comets are 1,000, but they've estimated way more than that. But they know about 1,000 of them. All right, the farthest distance traveled by a man-made object, more than 9.3 billion miles. 9,300,000,000 miles is the distance reached by Voyager 1 on August 15, 2006 at 10:13 a.m. This corresponds to 100 times the distance from the Earth to the Sun. So they traveled 100 times farther than going from the Earth to the Sun. And that Voyager that did that is still traveling away. So today, it's probably gone even farther. So these are fun things to look up since this book was written a while ago. The people have discovered new facts since then. Okay, turn to page 114 and we'll read a little bit about Saturn. Saturn is the sixth closest planet to the Sun. The average distance is 888 million miles. The diameter at the equator, so the distance straight across the middle right at the equator, is 74,898 miles. The Earth is, the surface area is 83.7 times the Earth. So that means that if we wanted to wrap Saturn in paper, how much paper would we need to go around it? The volume, so the amount of space it takes up, is 763.59 times Earth. So that means we have to have that many Earths to equal it. Mass is 95 times the Earth's mass, which means it's going to have a greater gravity. And the gravity is 91% of the Earth's gravity. It takes 29.46 Earth years to circle the Sun. And actually, looks like Saturn's gravity is less than ours. So we go around the Sun in a year, right? Every 29 almost and a half years that we have, Saturn goes around one time. So if you counted your years and Saturn years, you wouldn't be a year old until you were 29 and a half. Okay, the structure of Saturn is hot. Rocky core that's surrounded by a liquid metal layer that's itself surrounded by a liquid hydrogen and helium layer. So there's some gas in Saturn. Then there is an atmosphere. There then is an atmosphere that surrounds it all. Winds have been recorded at 1,116 miles per hour in Saturn's atmosphere. Hurricane winds are going to run around 50 to 70 miles per hour, and those are really, really bad. So over 1,000 miles per hour would be really tough. By comparison, the strongest wind ever recorded on Earth is 231 miles per hour. In Mount Washington, New Hampshire, on April 12, 1934. It is believed that wind speeds can sometimes reach over 300 miles per hour inside tornadoes. So kind of get a picture of how fast this wind is on Saturn. However devastating these winds are still very slow compared to Saturn's winds. So far, Saturn has 59 confirmed moons. 7 of them are round. Titan is the largest, is the only known moon within the solar system to have an atmosphere. In volume, Titan is more than 3 times bigger than our moon. So 3 of our moons would be Titan. All right, so that is the end of chapter 12. See you next time.